Hey everybody, this is Andy Hall. You're watching Best Advice Ever. This is the show where great people come on and talk about the best advice they ever got. Today, we have Michael Patrick Duggan. Michael Patrick Duggan wears many hats. And what I'm going to do is read his bio from his site, michaelpatrickduggan.net, so you can get acquainted with him before we start chatting. Michael Patrick Duggan is a writer and cartoonist. He has worked as an illustrator, colorist, or writer on several comic books, magazines, and novels, including Disney Adventures, The Tick, Foodang, The Dark, Green Lantern, Fantastic Four, Clown with a Gun, my personal favorite, The Lemming, Bunny and Turtle, The Man Named Eleanor, Nuos, I know I just mispronounced that, and UOS, Atomic Clown, Atomic Men, and LA, Heaven and Hell, and drawn storyboards for The Tick, Dino Trucks, Doug, King of the Hill, Astrid Studelman, and the Wild Thornberries. In addition, he has drawn many merchandising pieces, from trading cards to toy cover artwork for major franchises, including Harry Potter, DC Comics, Heroes, and more. Michael Patrick Duggan is a proud nerd with profound opinions about Art Nouveau, Art Deco, mythology, Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, and yes, The West Wing. Rumor has it, though Sorting Hat put him in Hufflepuff, he's not sure what to think about that. Michael Patrick Duggan, how you doing, sir?
I'm good, sir. How you doing?
You have quite the resume here of work on various productions. What did you think? Before we talk about advice or anything really important, what did you think about the Amazon Prime rendition of The Tick?
Oh, I liked it quite a lot, but it did not survive. The Tick never does. So
it lasted for 2 glorious seasons on Amazon Prime. And I was super depressed when it got canceled. It's like, why would you cancel that?
Right.
It has everything you would think a show would need. It had a great cast, great writing, fun characters. What went wrong, Michael? You're the expert with comic books here. What went wrong?
Oh God, just wasn't what people thought it would be. They never do. It's so outside the box, but it's presented in a way that people have an expectation of one thing, but then they receive a different thing, and they can never quite get their head around it, I think. And it's too bad. And I think something in the packaging, the delivery, you know how they say, like, when you work in a genre, you need to follow the rules of that genre. And so, and I think that's been a problem. I think some of the advertising and some of the delivery of what it was supposed to be made it appear less funny and more action-oriented than it really was. Yeah. And I think that got in the way a little bit. Expectations around, are all around, so, and people have them and they build them in the weirdest ways. You have to be very careful about that with advertising. So I think that's what happened. And, the guy who created it, he's brilliant, and he's done so many different shows where he was like the executive producer now. And all those shows have been incredibly successful, but
we're talking about Ben Edlund. Ben Edlund's been creative force on Supernatural and Angel.
And Angel.
And arguably some of the best episodes of Angel, too, to put on my geek hat a little bit harder, just to slow it down.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's firmly fixed on your head right now. So I'm seeing it.
Yeah, very good.
And, that's the thing, is like he knows how to market things and he knows how that works. But this was his very first project ever. He did it when he was 16 years old. Yeah. And it came back when he was, 45 years old, 50? He's my age exactly. So I think we're exactly the same age almost. We're within days. And so he would have been in his late 40s when Tick reemerged live. It would have been right at the end of the 40s. And so, I don't know. Crazy.
True enough. I really liked the animated show when that was on.
Yes, me too. That was a good one.
So the last time that we talked, because you're on my old show, Naked Diner, and we were talking about your Art Nouveau coloring books.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at your site, and you have like produced a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, I did 4 of them in the end. I did 3 of them that were about mythology, which got me a lot of sort of traction in the weirdest circles for the longest time. And then at the end, I just did 1 more, and it was just sci-fi tropes as a coloring book, and they were sci-fi tropes that I entirely they were like my idea of sci-fi tropes, probably. Like I was just like, I'm gonna draw a bunch of moon princesses and I need to
Right.
sell them. So, so these are the tropes. Look at her.
I'm starting to see a through line to your work, because I was looking at the Dungeons and Dragons module that you wrote,
Yeah.
What Lurks in Foster's Grove, and I believe that there is a fairy princess involved. I only read the outline.
There is, yeah. There's a pixie princess who dies. And upon her death, the grove, this magic grove where these people have been living for forever, their family have been living, suddenly has a dark presence come in. And so the adventure on that one is really just the mystery of trying to solve where this came from and what it is.
Right.
And of course, there's monsters and treasure, and it's Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Good times.
You get some adventure, you get some gold, there's some magic, and supernatural evils mucking about somewhere.
I was like, yeah, I got a couple of weeks. I'll write some adventure and draw some maps. So,
yeah,
yeah,
ideal time. So what kind of what are you working on now, dude?
Well, I just finished a novel that's it's sort of a fantasy detective novel. It's a little bit J.R. Tolkien, a little bit Jane Austen, and a little bit Agatha Christie all at once. And it's about a young woman who she's the last of her family, it turns out, and she has to take over the role of what they do in this fantasy kingdom, which is to be the knight protector of the realm. But she's definitely living in like a very Jane Austen sort of world. So she's got a magic sword, but she's in a high-waisted gown. She's going to balls. She's having like the time of her life, but then there's blood zombies and there's all kinds of magic and people out to kill her and all this stuff. And so it's sort of she's like a fish out of water, but she is still a member of this, family tradition. So it's like a hero's journey type thing as well.
Sure.
So
how far along are you with it?
It's done.
It's done. Well, that's
the whole book is done. The whole book is done. I've got everything put together. The only thing I've been chewing on for the last day is the title.
Oh,
what
really?
To call it? Yeah, what to call it. So my editor and my agent were like, I hate all the names you have for it. And I was like, oh, crap. So
all of them?
Well,
that seems like a lot.
This goes back to the Ben Edlund problem. So actually, and that is, know your genre. So, and I need to really think about that. Like, what exactly I'm calling this thing? Is it appropriate for what I've just written? So, and it's a big book. It's a big old full novel, and it's very detailed. And there's a lot of magic, and there's a lot of sort of like people worrying over whether they're going to get married or not, because it's super Jane Austen too.
Right.
And I need to think about that and like what that would really be called. So do I want to go for like the pun with like, power and principle, or like the Jane Austen pun,
Oh yeah. I'm glomming there with you. I'm with you on that. It's funny, from my limited exposure to LA and interacting with people in the business. Yeah. There's this saying that people want to hear something that they're familiar with, but with a twist, right?
Exactly.
So you can't be too creative.
Right. So you just cannot.
But that's what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be the creative person doing creative things, and it's like the market does not reward that, my friend. Not when not when you color outside the lines. You see what I did there?
Yep, I did.
Yeah.
A little callback.
A little callback. This is the only thing that I try to pass off as wit.
Yeah. It's pretty
that's
good. It's all right. It's not bad.
I try.
You're
So hey,
still
this is
alive. It's gotten you this far.
my fictitious God. Yes, I am still alive. I was at work for a week because of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Because I work with people with disabilities, and so I was out of work, and then I was back in work for 25 hours, and now the house is clear. It's no longer in quarantine. So everything just seems a little bit brighter and a little bit happier.
Ooh, that does seem better. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Wow. Whew.
Yeah. So,
That's
dude,
fun.
this is probably a good place to pivot and to talk about the best advice you ever got.
The best advice I ever got. So I do have kind of this story. So it's good advice. It's real good advice. So I was like 14 years old, and I was headed out to go to school one morning, and my father, who never would be around at that hour, was sort of like waiting in the living room. I was headed for the bus, and he's like, "I'm going to drive you to school. I want to talk to you about something." And I was like, "Oh," a stern Irish fellow. You know what I mean? So anyway, he drives me over there, and he like parks like a block away from school, and he's like, "I know you don't want to be parking right in front because you'll be embarrassed by me." And I'm like, "No, seriously, you can park me right in front. That's fine. I don't want to walk." And but he's like, "What I wanted to talk to you about is what you're going to do with your life, where you're headed, like where things are with you. You know, your mother and I had to decide early on in life where we were, and we have made a good life for ourselves. And so I want to talk to you about this. What do you want to do with your life?" And so I'm like 14 years old. So I'm like, so I said, I want to, I don't know, I want to be a writer. I want to be like J.R. Tolkien or Kurt Vonnegut, something like that. Somebody I really admired, and it just popped right into my head right then. And so my dad says to me, "Well, you know what those two guys have in common, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they're both writers, you know." So he's like, "No, what I was going to say is they finish what they start." And I was like, "Okay, well, thanks for that, Dad." So 11 years later, I'm in New York City. Kurt Vonnegut's speaking down at the Union Square.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, wow, Kurt Vonnegut, my hero." I head down there. I wait in the line. It's terrible. It takes forever. It's snowing outside. You know, it was like a whole thing. We stood in the slush. I finally get up to him. I'm all quivering. I've got like 5 of his books, you know, in hand. Everybody's signing and stuff. I say, "Mr. Vonnegut, I'm a writer. I want to be a writer. I want to be one too. You know, like I'm an aspiring writer. Do you have any advice? Any advice for me?" And Kurt Vonnegut looks at me and he says, "I don't know. Finish what you start."
Wow.
And I just looked at him and I thought, oh, God. So I went home. I called my dad. So, and I was like, "Do you remember?" And he's like, "No." So I don't remember that at all. But that's great advice. You know, so that was the advice. Finish what you start.
Was there a point in your life that really paid off?
Well, it's paying off right now. I mean, I've got several novels running through the final stages, when for years I would start novels and just never quite get there. You know, I would start classes on something, or I'd start a project with somebody, and then just it would drop off over and over. And a lot of that has to do with like the LA lifestyle, where people are starting things and they're trying to get stuff off the ground, but then they've got a different opportunity that drags them away. And that does happen a lot there because it's Los Angeles and there's that. But no, I just, you know, one day I just thought to myself, screw this. All I'm doing is getting older. Like that is not stopping. So I'm never going to have that moment where I like think to myself, okay, I've now had my fun youth, and I can get serious about stuff. And, you know, that just isn't going to happen. So, you know, just get going. Just start, and then finish. So the part of, I guess, my dad's advice I didn't really hear was the implied, you know, not just finish what you start, but actually start something for real.
Right.
Like real thing.
Right. Like a real thing. So is there So here's a good question. So when you're thinking about doing a project, is there a way for you to know that something you're going to be working on is something that's going to hold your attention through the duration, as against to something that's like, oh, I'm just going to lose any amount of passion for this within 2 or 3 days? Is there a way for you to know?
There's a discovery process, actually. Like most things, if you really think about like whether you really want to do it, that's one thing. Then you have to kind of walk down a road and decide if it's really something you can and will do, and if it's something that's going to mean anything at all to you. You know, I mean, I used to worry when I was younger about like very Catholic worry of, you know, is this even worth anyone else's time at all? And you have to come to the conclusion that it's worth your time, and if it's worth your time, then it's probably going to be worth somebody else's time. If it's not, then lo and behold, you were simply wrong.
Yeah.
And that's all.
I imagine, if nothing else, if you write something for you and other people, it doesn't resonate with other people, there is still a set of skills that you learn and that you hone during that process.
It's true. I mean, I just wrote that whole book, and I really felt like I got to the point by the end of it where, like, I was kind of a chatty writer, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I understand. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not now. So, but I still have tons of description and detail, but I'm not falling into this side thing where I kind of pivot down on the side road and get caught up in some side story or get caught up in some fluffy detail that's not important to the story. I'm feeling it more and more every time I finish one of these things. Like, it's better than the last book was, you know, and the last book was better than the book before it. So,
are you outlining?
I do extensively now.
Yeah.
So, I used to outline about halfway up through the book and then think, okay, I'll figure this out as I go. And now I outline all the way to the end of the book. And then if it changes direction, I start re-outlining.
Yeah.
And, you know, and just have to know ahead of time. So
I'm writing a short story right now, and I'm outlining it. You know, I wrote the first page and a half or so. And I have a basic idea, but I really have to, because you get acquainted with the characters within a short period of time, and I know what the twist is, but I just have to create that internal structure. Yeah,
it's true, and that whole every character has a motivation of some kind, just has got to be there, you know. So otherwise you really can stall out. So, you know, and particularly with like main characters, I have a tendency to write slightly, like, sometimes the side characters are more interesting than the main character, and I'll fall into that little problem because my main character is just going to be heroic or whatever, and then suddenly I've got all the quirks and all the things are going off over into the best friend, and people reading it later are like, you know, I really like the best friend. What was the main character's name? You know, then I'm like, fuck, you know, crap. So.
Well, once again, with the outlining, you don't get, you're more focused and you're less likely to go on those side quests, right?
Exactly.
Whether it's plot or character driven, you're more focused on the through line there. Yeah.
And on an outline, you can also write in a character note where not to go, too. So you can always make sure that the one so-and-so is never more interesting than the main one. You have to like say it over and over to yourself. And it's like a weird thing. It's like falling in love, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you have to be aware of what you feel. Mm-hmm. And you really don't actually need to be aware of anyone else's feelings during that time. So if you fall in love and they don't fall in love back, well, then you're just heartbroken.
That's just life. Then I think that's what they call that. I don't want to sound too negative or anything, but you know, as a person, yeah. Of course, it's easy for us to say because we're both in pretty well, you know, firm, committed relationships. But,
done.
That's. So, do you have any idea on the next project? Are you going to be working on a series based on that character?
Yeah, I think so. So like this time the character had like a terrible mystery to solve where she was at a gala ballroom and a person just died, and then it led to a series of horrible encounters with the undead and monsters and all kinds of stuff. And in the next one, there's another series of horrible, murderous people at other parties who are also out to kill and stuff like that. But it's a completely different idea, but it's, a different set of parties, different set of people, same murderous impulses. So,
well, people like parties, don't they? I think that's
do.
a pretty good element to put in a story.
There's also that whole thing with like, just, when you write a murder series, which this kind of is, it's a fantasy series, but it's based around murders.
Yeah.
And you really have to stick to that theme. So,
True
so I've got
enough.
that,
Well, with mysteries too, getting back to the idea about outlining, you really have to be meticulous with that, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you have to lead a trail of breadcrumbs for the reader, along with the red herrings. I don't want to get too food-based here, but you can't just suddenly come up with the murderer without people going to themselves, oh, I see how that worked through the last 300 pages or so. I can see that happening, as against to it just comes out of nowhere. Like the eagles from Tolkien at these magical moments when things go horribly wrong.
Suddenly there's a giant bird. So
I'm not knocking Tolkien at all. But, I mean, you probably want to stay away from that literary element.
It's true. Yeah, most of it is like when you outline the way I outline this murder and the series of what happened and where it was I essentially wrote a side story where the individual who was up to no good, I wrote what this person was doing as a side thing. So I actually had there's a second story behind it all, which just talks about over the days that the main character was on the hunt, on the trail, this other person was also doing the following things. And I wrote that down as like that flow, so that I also understood where they would cross paths again and in what context. And then that way I could drop more clues. I could have some behavior be a little funny here and there or whatever. Kind of because, and then that's the thing about so Columbo did that. And it was such a great show. And so you always knew, I mean, in Columbo, you actually, as I recall, you always knew who the murderer was.
Yes, it wasn't a question
about,
yes, you knew who it was, and it was more about the play, the dance between Columbo and the criminal.
Yeah. I don't have so much of that in this book. Most of it's just mystery, and the main character spends a lot of time going, how does anybody figure these things out? Like this is insane. Like honestly, like we're supposed to figure this out from that broken cup over there. Like what's this about? So I want answers now. But yeah, but writing that out did help a lot.
Sure. And I imagine the mystery genre, it's easier to do the page turner, to make it a page turner.
Yeah.
Because you're doing setup, payoff, almost, I guess if you do it right every page or every, there's definitely a pace to it.
There can be, yeah. There's a lot of interviewing too, though. Like the main, if you really want to get this down, you have to go through and you have to have a list of suspects, and then they have to all have reasons and alibis and crap like that going on, and that gets a little bit tidy. So you wind up doing a lot of house cleaning with people. So and then there is a tendency where you're sitting there and you're wondering just how desperately does this individual need to alert the main character that they are innocent, and what length are they going to go to tell them? Are they really fully aware that they're a suspect, etc.? And so you have to think those things out, and that gets a little that bogs you right down real quick.
Do you find yourself pruning pages after the first draft, after the second draft?
Pruning?
Like pruning page, like just taking stuff out. That was unnecessary.
Oh yeah, no, I wrote probably. So this book it ended at 130,000 words, and I probably pruned it down to 90.
Wow,
that's that. So
that is some gardening, sir. That's what that is.
yes, sir, that is. There's a lot of waffling, and there was a lot of going on about things.
Oh, yeah.
So I also dumped like several witnesses. I just decided they were unnecessary. I could put them in another book if I want or whatever, but maybe if they're really that charming, but they really weren't. They just were just like people giving alibis and being pithy and angry that they're being disturbed by this terrible murder.
Right.
And and then I thought, screw that. Just and then instead, actually on this one, almost every single individual in the book is like, oh my God, there's been a murder. Holy crap, there's been a murder. So. And, that is one thing, like Agatha Christie used to have this thing, very British, where they'd be very put out by having to be interviewed. And like a common thing was like a little bit of lip back from the potential suspect and stuff. And I just thought that's horrible. So
unnecessary.
It's unnecessary. It's very cultural too,
Sure enough. True enough.
I don't need to necessarily go that route, even though I have a fantasy kingdom and everybody probably talks in an English accent because it's a fantasy kingdom that they're in. But I didn't have to go quite there. So
So I'm sure that there are going to be people who are watching this and wondering, how did you get your agent?
I wrote another novel before this, and that one was about teenage wizards living in Los Angeles. It was YA. And so I wrote that, and then I lived in Los Angeles. And so what happened is I'd lived there for 20 years, and I'd worked in television, and I'd worked for publishing companies. So I have a wide base of contacts. And so what I did was I went straight to those contacts, and I asked every single one of them if they knew a literary agent and if I could talk to that person or show them my manuscript. And that's how I got it, was through friends and nepotism. And
we'll just call it networking, Michael. That's what we'll call it. Good old-fashioned gumshoe networking. How's that?
I know it's the worst answer ever, but it's it's true. I just tracked it down through friends, and this actually came about from this was like a friend of a friend.
Sure.
I had sent the manuscript to one friend, and she was and her friend was a director who had this agent, and he swung by her house, but she was still running an errand, and so he sat down in her living room where my manuscript was sitting, and he read the first couple pages and then asked her about it when she walked in. She was like, yeah, that's my friend, he's desperate. If you've got an agent, he will do anything for you.
Very nice.
Yeah, the guy was like, oh, great. Okay, well, terrific. I don't need anything, but I'll call her. And so that's how it ended up happening. So
that's great. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And we started off with some advice about, finishing what you start.
Yeah.
And then got into a really good conversation about writing and the nuts and bolts of the craft. Yeah. This has been a great conversation, Michael Patrick Duggan.
It is always a pleasure to see you, Andy Hall.
So, dude, where can people find you online?
You can find me at mpatrickduggan.net. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter. If you want to get into an argument about politics, I'm there. So I'm ready. And I've got an Instagram account. Almost everything I have is mpatrickduggan. So
very cool.
Well,
that's great, man. Well, thanks again for coming on Best Advice Ever.
Gosh, thanks for having me.